Hello, good evening. I hope everybody's well, everybody's healthy. Welcome to another session where we will discuss the recent new patterns that have been introduced. Before that, I would like to share with you, well, obviously, I would recommend that we maintain precautions, we maintain the decorum. The weather in Delhi NCR is treacherous, it is precarious, the conditions are such, the atmosphere, as we can say, is pregnant with diseases. They are spreading. We are hurtling towards an increase in all sorts of diseases. Once again, we are still under the threat of another wave. We are still in what we call as the global pandemic. It is recommended that we all follow the precautions. What I've observed is the mask that is supposed to be worn, which covers the respiratory orifices, it lies on the chin, then that's the entire purpose is defeated. It is my humble request to all of you. I believe all of you are visiting your respective educational institutes. Make sure you cover your mouth and nose completely at all times. The disease, the global pandemic is being spread. This viral disease is being spread because of the aerosolization, which makes it very difficult. Therefore, covering the mouth is nose is important. Not just that, other precautions to be followed for the rainy season, as you call it. Technically, monsoons are supposed to be over now, but still, because of the rains, we should have a proper hygiene. Washing of hands is essential. The sanitizer is not a magic liquid. Please make sure you wash your hands rigorously, thoroughly before, especially before consuming any food. The food and water that we consume, that should not be contaminated. As I said, there's a lot of diseases that spread during the rains, all sorts of digestion based diseases, all sorts of pathogens will infect the unhygienic water, food that so as long as you're not aware of the origin of food or water in front of you, do not consume it. That is how we make sure that we have hygienic conditions. I would recommend we maintain it. There's quite a lot of students who are reporting sick. The simple reason is they were drenched in the rain. Delhi witnesses some unique concepts such as acid rain, and then of course there's the vector-borne diseases as well. So vector-borne diseases, we will study about them ironically, but for now at least maintain, of course most of you are aware of these conditions. Usually to overcome the threat of vector-borne diseases, we recommend that you cover the elbows and knees, especially during dawn and dusk. That is the time, but usually I would recommend do it at all times so that we protect ourselves. There are other requests, there are other do's and don'ts that you should follow. I would recommend you do that. This is a time for you to start visiting your respective educational institutes, especially schools. Let's make sure you visit your schools in a healthy manner, otherwise the entire purpose is defeated. It is essential that we go further with the schedule that is being introduced, and the schedule that has been introduced is such that you will at the end of the day have to physically visit places. Let's make sure that once you visit physically any educational institute, you are physically and mentally available. Please do not self-medicate. I've been requesting this all along. Any disease should be taken, any illness, any symptoms should be taken seriously. Let's not aggravate the situation further. Today I want to talk about recently what the CBSE introduced. I'm sure you've had a look at it. It is still essential that we talk about it. In the beginning of the academic year, CBSE introduced an improvised pattern. an improvised syllabus, or in fact this is something most of you already know because we discussed this in the beginning of the academic year. The CBSE bifurcated the syllabus. I think I've shown you this kind of tabular forms because this is directly from the CBSE. All relevant documents have been uploaded in the app. If you have not checked it out, please do so. Moreover, I have also provided you a physical print version of these documents as well. Even though most of you have collected study materials, some of you are still left. Please make sure you collect it from me. The bifurcation of the syllabus means that for now we are to concentrate on the term 1 syllabus. Ideally, most of you should be done with it. Of course, in the classes that we've conducted since the beginning of the academic year, we've been able to complete not only these chapters but the rest of the deleted versions as well, and in fact we've moved on to term 2. For now, I would recommend let's halt the extracurricular and let's concentrate more on this term 1 examination. According to this, your biology subject is still supposed to be a 100-mark paper. It's supposed to be a total of 100 marks. The 100 marks have been divided according to the bifurcation that has been done. But as I said, for now, we cannot discuss this part of the table simply because we've got some other aspects. All we need to concentrate on is the theory, and then there's the practicals as well. The practicals will have they have a much more significant part to play, even though they are 15 marks each. Once again, practicals will play an important part. You may not have to go for hands-on practicals. Hands-on practicals are where you actually experiment. You may not have to do that, but whatever type of practical based concept your school comes up with, you have to participate in it seriously. Why do I harp on it? Simply put, we are not aware of what the future holds for us. We are not aware. We have a big question mark is on all of the schedules we prepare, and that big question mark is to do with the so-called third wave. So we have to be practical about it, and according to the schedule setup, practicals may end up being one of those major criterias for you to be judged, for you to be based your marks on. Let's make sure you take them wholeheartedly. Once again, it is essential that all communications are done with me. You keep the channels open. That's what I say. Continue to communicate with me. I would be able to help you out further, even with the practicals, and sometimes you also have to go for projects. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. That may help you out. That may ease out your so-called burden. Let's do that. For now, today, I want to talk about what has been introduced. Now, obviously, you should be aware by now, the term 1 examination, we can't be sure about what the term 2 will hold for us in terms of examination. At least for the term 1, by the introduction of the so-called sample paper, CBSE has confirmed the fact that the term 1 examination is going to be a completely MCQ based type of examination. Most of you are supposed to attempt a sort of a half-yearly examination. Your schools, most of your schools, the information that you've sent me, are going to conduct these examinations. If that is the case, then it becomes even more important to discuss this. So today's class, I want to take up this topic. I want to talk about the example, the sample paper that will be taken up, and it will be taken up as an example for all of your school-based examinations and even beyond. Once again, I have uploaded, it is available on the CBSE website. I have uploaded it for you in the app itself. Make sure you check it out. The first information that comes up when we look at the sample question paper is the fact that it is not a continuous questionnaire. The sample question paper has been divided into 3 sections. Remember, this becomes important. This will now be the protocol which your schools follow. So the term 1 examination has been trifurcated into section A, section B, section C. A total of 60 questions are available, but there is an interesting criteria here. Even though 60 questions are given, you only have to answer 50. So actually, only 50 questions are supposed to be answered. Once again, you are not given a complete freedom, but in a sense, usually the pattern you may have followed, because most of you were given the previous CBSE pattern, theoretical type of pattern, in which a few questions had options. Here, CBSE has given you a complete section-wise option. What does that mean? Section A and B together or individually, they will have a total of 24 questions. You only have to attempt 20. So therefore, 4 are optional. But once again, there is no fixed options. All 24 options, all 24 questions in both the sections are available to you for answering. The way the wording has been given, and the next topic we deal with today will be about the type of answer sheet you deal with. Basically, the computer will read your answers. It is no longer a humane activity, or rather a human-based activity. The computer will scan and read the answer, and once the computer recognizes first 20 attempts, it will stop there, both for section B, section A, and section B, and in fact it goes on to section C as well. It's just that section C has only 12 questions, out of which you're supposed to answer 10. So this becomes in itself a big deal. This is also why I would recommend you practice a lot. I've provided you a lot of significant study material, especially questions. I will provide you even more. Please make it a habit to start practicing. Those of you who are still to study the chapters, please make sure you spend some time studying the chapters and then revising them, because after revision comes these practice. As much as is possible, if you think you've exhausted the amount of questions or the type of study material that I've given you, you come back to me. I can give you even more. So and of course the market is available. The market will be flooded with all sorts of options available, all sorts of examples. The most basic concern right now is that you're aware of it. Now, this in itself, as I said, is a big deal. Why is it a big deal? I'm not sure whether you've ever attempted, I think you have never attempted a question paper where you're given complete freedom. And this complete freedom will end up being a bane rather than a boon. What does that mean? Simply put, let's say you are attempting, you begin section A, you start answering, and you don't remember you have to answer 20 questions. You spend your time answering all 24. What may happen is, even though you've answered 24 questions, the computer will only read the first 20. It will ignore the rest of the 4 answers that you've given. What might end up happening is those 4 answers may have had correct ones, and the previous 20 may have had incorrect ones. Even if that does not happen, even if all your 24 questions are correct, you've answered them correctly, the computer will only read the first 20. This becomes a time waste. Time is of utmost importance. Ideally, it is supposed to be a 1.5-hour paper. Once again, even if it is not checked by the computers, your school-based examinations, if it's not checked by the computers, the pattern will have to remain the same because the CBSE had declared it. The same is the case for section B and C as well. In fact, once you come across section C, Since there are limited number of questions, there is a possibility by the time you're done with section A and B, there is a possibility you may not remember that you have to attempt only 10 questions and you may end up wasting time on 12. So this in itself is for you to be aware of. There are quite a few rules to be followed. Today, your seniors have attempted the NEET 2021, which has been postponed multiple times. There were quite a lot of guidelines, rules and regulations that were to be followed. The same will be true for your school-based examination as well. Please make sure you are aware of it. You are aware of what the rules say. For example, identification, photo identification. Now, obviously, your schools may not ask for it, but you never know. What if your schools ask you to bring along with you photo identification and you ignored it? You will not be allowed to enter the examination center. Please start preparing yourselves accordingly, because remember, our first board examination is in November, December ideally. Let's do that. Let's take all sorts of examinations seriously, not just because it's a practice, but also because it may end up being the criteria. It may end up being one of those additions to your marks. Internal assessment I'm talking about. So please be aware of all the rules and regulations. Once again, schools will provide you ample or enough information so that you are at least equipped with the right knowledge when it comes to examinations. Some further information about this type of examination pattern. I hope this much is clear. If any of you have any doubt whatsoever, this is the time to begin the questions. Today's class will be generally about this sample paper. It is essential you are aware of it. It is essential we start talking about it. There are some additional points. First of all, each correct answer will give you 1 mark, and each incorrect answer, there is no negative marking. So you will not get a mark. That's it. This is different from the new medical entrance pattern, so the so-called NEET pattern. Why? Because NEET has negative marking, which means incorrect answers will reduce your marks. Here, incorrect answers do not give you negative marks, which means you should attempt all the questions. Let's say you are not aware of the answers, you leave out those questions. If you are going for all the sections here and there are quite a few questions you do not know, you first attempt only the ones that you're aware of, you're sure of. Then come back to the questions that you left out earlier. That's also why the time is important. You should be preparing yourselves according to the time mandate as well. The initial 2 sections, as you can see, are full of questions. So you may spend up time there, and as I said, section C may not be given enough time. What will happen is the rest of the time, if you spend on section C, you may not get the opportunity to go back on the left out section A and B. So this is all based on practice, and that is going to be our next scope. The next aim for us, the next target, the next area of opportunity, as I say, is going to be practice about this new pattern. Up until now, the type of answer sheet you've been attempting examination on is a basic one, isn't it? You write the answers. Today, I want to introduce to you a new system of answering questions, and this is now followed for all professional. Globally, it is followed as well, and even now, even in India, we follow it for most professional based examination. What is it I'm talking about? I'm moving on here from questions. I'm now coming to answers. On the left of your screen is an example of what we call as an OMR sheet. What does OMR stand for? Optical mark recognition. Simply put, this is a piece of paper that is read by or scanned by the computer, and the computer recognizes the marks you've left behind, the coloring that you've done on some certain circles. Literally, every information that will be accepted on this sheet is nothing but a circle, a colored circle. This is very different, mind you, from the type of answers you have uh, attempted all your life basically, and that is why I will also make it a priority that I provide you an example of. So we'll have a physical example of this as well provided to you, and I would recommend have multiple copies of it and start practicing. For example, if you look at the topmost portion, you know your name. Obviously you can take your school roll number and you can give it a name. The subject code in CBSE remains the same, so you can refer to the subject codes as well and start practicing it. Why do I say it? Because this OMR sheet requires certain rule. It has some guidelines of its own. Again, you might be aware of it, but it is essential that we discuss it. The assumption is you've never looked at it. That is why it is important. On the right is an attempt that is being shown. If you look at it, this is how you make it out. So first, the blocks on the top, the rectangular blocks on the top, is for you to first write down your own specifics. This is the uppermost portion of the OMR sheet, by the way. Specifics, for example, this one, if you look at the color pattern, the roll number given is 06. So as soon as you know the numbers, you can, let me magnify this, you can actually start filling it out. Now, filling out these circles is also, there needs to be some do's and don'ts. Basically, if you look at it, the entire circle needs to be colored. And what sort of equipment, what sort of pen do you use? First of all, you cannot use a pencil. You have to use a ballpoint pen. This is absolutely important that you're aware of the type of pen you can use on an OMR sheet. It has to be a ballpoint pen, my apologies, and the color should be either blue or black. The reason is simple. Once the computer is scanning, the background is white. It's a light colored background. So there needs to be a sharp contrast between the light colored background and the answer that you provide. I have selected a few do's and don'ts just so that you're aware of. Simply put, of the 4 options, and there will always be only 4 options, as you might be aware. I'll discuss the type of question we have, what is MCQ, but for now look at the various schemes that should be ignored, the various ways in which you answer, and it should not happen. The entire circle should be colored in such a manner. Technically, this first option that you see is also incorrect. Why? Because the color should be such that the computer cannot read the number. If the computer can read the number, there is a possibility it will move on because it can read the number. So the computer requires that you completely fill it. That is also why it is a ballpoint ink. The ink that you use is a ballpoint pen from a ballpoint pen. Why? Because gel, there is a possibility that the ink will not dry quickly and the number will become visible. So technically even the first one which is shown as correct is incorrect here, but we will concentrate here on the right side of your screen. If you look at it, the first option, the first precaution it tells you is that there should not be any ink mark on any of the other options. This is an interesting point because what happens is there are times when your pen, the ink might leak. The ink might leak, and as long as there is a mark visible, if the computer sees a mark, this entire question becomes negated out. Remember this, even if it's a correct answer, it will no longer be accepted by the computer because there are double ink marks. You cannot go for a tick. The circle has to be colored completely. Completely means that not the circumference. Remember, this number should not be visible. So I'm moving on from tick, the second one, which is question number 27, to question number 28, which shows you the coloring is only done in the periphery. As long as the number is visible to the computer, it will ignore it even if you mark certain areas of the circle. You can see question number 29, the marking instead of a tick is a cross through, is a strike through. That is unacceptable as well. This will be ignored by the computer. And once again, the coloring should not go beyond the circle. You can now see that this is a very different type of scheme. This is a very different pattern of answering the questions. You have not prepared for it all your life. That is the sad part. That is the unique part. I am happy that CBSE has introduced this today, because, or rather it has been introduced now, because for you as NEET aspirants, most of you has expressed an interest in pursuing medical sciences from India itself, which means you will be attempting the medical entrance examination. If that is the case, this becomes, the board examination in itself becomes a practice for NEET. And that is absolutely important. Practice for NEET, practice for board. This requires practice. So the above portion, this is what I'm referring to. The above portion of this OMR sheet, I would recommend you have multiple copies and you start preparing it. At least start doing it for your name. So what happens? Why am I saying this? And this is based on experience, by the way. The reason I harp on this is because once you are aware in this long alphabetical list, if you are aware which option you're supposed to color. So let's say you write down the name here as ABC. Or let me use the right one because the right one is visible. Let's say the actual roll number was 1, 2, and 3. And if you remember the coloring scheme, if you have practiced it multiple times, then the coloring schemes that exist you also remember. You remember where the coloring patterns are. Based on that as well, you can make out that you're going for incorrect ones. And of course, there's also muscle memory. You may become accustomed to writing down your names in such a manner. So muscle memory, in fact, is what we are looking for when we say practice. At least that will create a scenario in which you are used to it. At least the above portion should be done quickly. Yes, you are given time. You are given time to fill it up. I believe board examinations did introduce OMR, at least for writing down your names. So this much was introduced, but the next portion has become even more important, because as you can see, the rest of the questions, now this OMR sheet gives you 200 questions. It doesn't have to be 200. As we see, there are 50 questions you're supposed to answer. So you'll be given 60 options, obviously. Number of questions will be 60. Regardless of how many questions exist, as you can see, the options will always be 4. And these 4 options, the numbering will always be A, B, C, D. Remember this, it will always be an A, B, C, D numbering for options. The question number and the option that is the correct answer is one thing. Then the question itself can have various numbers itself. So you can see it gets complicated. It is important that you do not get confused. What the experience tells me is, what students have experienced over the years is the fact that while attempting the answer, they got confused between the question number and the options that existed in the question and the answer sheet itself. And this is also where practicing will help you. So let's make it a habit to start using these kind of sheets. As I said, even if you cannot use the answer type, the lowermost portion, the above portion you should practice. Now this was the answer sheet. As you see, it's called the OMR sheet. OMR sheet is a blank sheet. What about the most important one, the booklet that you will be given? It will be the list of questions. let's move on. Let's spend some time talking about the new sample paper and what sort of questions. So the ideal question that should exist and what additional types have been introduced, and there's quite a lot of variety. That is also why I have taken up an entire class of today to discuss this with you. Let's move on quickly. Let's look at the most obvious type of question that can exist. Obviously, all questions will be MCQ. What does MCQ stand for? Multiple choice questions. There will be multiple choices given to you and only one correct option exists. The answer is the correct option, obviously. The issue that arises, the variation that can come up is usually the question itself. How long is the question? What exists in the question? The question itself can have multiple parts to it. Remember, one question, the number of the question and the answer will only have 4 options. That is a limitation. So no longer how long your question is, you should remember there are only 4 options at the end of the day. Now these things may not sound difficult right now. I will try to show you the examples where it can get complicated. The numbering scheme in the question and the numbering scheme of the answers, it can vary significantly. That is why stick to ABCD. Remember the ABCD that you have to answer for. The ideal multiple choice question that should exist, even if it's the most basic one, what are the answers? Obviously, the correct answer is only one. What about the next 3 options? Now, usually this is not a hard and fast rule. That's why I've written here, it may vary. But there is always this situation where one of the options may sound like the answer as well. And this is a tricky situation that is usually recommended. Why? Because the entire purpose here is for you to know the right answer without looking at the options. This is what I recommend always. Once you've read the question in biology, once you've read the question, you should know the answer. Yes, there are some numerical based, especially for term 1, you will have to perform some steps. But it is essential, at least for biology, the fact that as soon as you read the question, you should have an idea of the correct option. You should know what we are talking about. When you read the question, you should immediately know the topic at hand, what sort of options should exist in itself. The reason why I say this is because if you start looking at options and if this culprit comes up, then it is bound to cause confusion, a lot of confusion. Even if there's no negative marking currently, that does not mean that you will not get incorrect answers. Simply put, only remember the correct option. Only remember the answer here without looking at the options. That is the only way to go about it. Yes, that might not be possible all the time. I understand that. In that scenario, obviously, we have to redirect ourselves and read the options altogether. If we have to do that, if we have to read the options, go through the options once thoroughly, and once you've chosen your answer, compare it to others as well. This is also why I say do not look at the options, because if you know the answer, you search for that option only. Ignore the rest of them. Once you start comparing these options, especially in the case where you're not aware of the answer, this is going to become absolutely confusing. So I'm trying to give you what may happen, but the ideal scenario is that you do not look at the options. You remember the answer and then you search for the answer from the various ABCD options. This is based on a lot of experience that is shared by previous students, or the attempts, the practices that have been done by your seniors. This is what has come up. This is a recommendation. It does not mean you have to follow it. This is not a hard and fast rule, but still it is recommended. And especially for the case of biology. In biology, most questions you should know the answer, but simply put, because these are terms and definitions, so on and so forth. Theoretical based questions. This is the usual multiple choice questionnaire that should be, because there will be the term 1 examination will have 60 questions. This should be in plenty. But there are other types of questions that have been introduced, and those are something that requires even further elaboration. We need to talk about them. The other obvious one that most of you did attempt, so this was introduced last year. What am I talking about? Let's let's show you what the other type of question scheme is. It is assertion reason type. Assertion reason type, as I said, a lot of the schools did go for it for your 11th. You may have practiced it for 11th, but now it becomes even more important, because your examination questions will have significant number of them as assertion reason type. Remember, there is equal weightage to all questions. So that means all questions are important. Let's make sure we remember these type of questions. Let's talk about what is it. So for those who are unaware, assertion reason type, basically the question will firstly provide a statement. Then there will be another statement given, which is a possible explanation. It is a possible explanation for the first statement. Then there follows a set of options. The most obvious option is that both the statements are true and the explanation is enough for the statement. The second statement can correctly explain the first one. That is option A. Option B will usually, again, this is a generalized scheme based on the sample paper that has been published. The options themselves can change. This is the usual way in which the assertion reason type answers or options are provided. So the other option can be that both the statements are true, but the explanation is not enough for the first statement. That is why it is, let me use a different color scheme now. So that is why it is strike through, which means both statements being true, reason cannot provide an explanation for the assertion. As you can see, this is a next level of questioning scheme. Why? Because for this, you should know what topic we are talking about. After knowing the topic, you should be able to correlate both the statements. If the statements do not correlate, then that is something you should already, that is also why I say don't look at the options. Look at the statements, read the statement multiple times, try to debate in your mind whether the reason can go for assertion. This is something that will take time. These type of questions will take time, especially because there is a scenario where your mind is somewhere else, because you're answering one after the other. Your mind may not be associated with this type of questioning scheme. So you have to first of all get ready for this. While attempting all the questions, you have to get ready for this. You have to prepare yourselves. What I notice in the sample paper that has been published is the fact that these will be asked collectively together, which is good. Why? Because then you have a mindset for assertion reason type. I have already stated some questions will require some time for you to spend on them. This is that type of question. Of course, the other options are that one of these statements is not true. Now, where the confusion arises, let's say you know the answer. The confusion that can arise, and at the end of the day, even knowing the answer, you will have an incorrect answer that you mark, is because you don't remember the option. The later two options talk about true and false, the first statement being true or the second statement being true. This is also, and remember, these are two different pieces of paper that you're looking at. So first you read the question and then you go back to your OMR sheet to answer it. This is one of those areas where a lot of students have ended up marking incorrect answers. And remember, if you go on to your medical entrances, if you talk about your medical entrances, then there is a negative marking introduced for this incorrect answers. So you have to be prepared to answer the correct question, and the correct option is chosen, obviously. Once again, assertion reason type of questioning is where the statement is given to you and then an explanation of the statement is given. You have to decide whether first of all both the statements are true, and if both the statements are true, whether the reason can explain the assertion or not. The assertion reason type of questioning, if you're really interested, it used to be part of one of the toughest medical entrances conducted in our country, the AIMS undergraduate entrance examination. This has been followed up from there, and this will make the idea. I've always stated the fact that especially in biology, understanding is important. If you do not understand the topic, these type of questions cannot be dealt with. Rote learning will not result in you being able to attempt these type of questions. It requires a basic understanding of the topic. The good news here is everything is associated with the basic textbook, which is NCRT. So you need to talk, you need to deal with it, you need to be aware of every corner of the book thoroughly. The term one has limited chapters. Make sure those limited chapters are on your fingertips. I want to move on here. Uh, do allow me a minute. So we'll talk about the next series of questions. Let me quickly grab a glass of water. The discussion that we've had up until now is on the premise that the question itself is these are theoretical questions, these are basic English statements. What is the other type that exists? And once again, there are a lot of them. What am I talking about? I am talking about diagram based questions. So these are examples. I don't want to go into the actual content of the question. Our concern right now, this class is all about the type of question that exists. So I've literally taken the actual example that exists in the sample paper. Once again, sample paper, all subjects sample paper class 12, they're available on the CBSE website. I have uploaded it for your perusal, for quickly accessing it in the app itself. Make sure you check it out. The most basic diagram based questions that can exist will simply ask you what is the topic that the diagram deals with, and this is where the request that I made at the beginning and almost every class, to always go back to your NCRT diagram. So diagram based questions in board examinations have been introduced. They were introduced some time back. They have continued this topic, but now it becomes difficult because simple diagram based questions will now be complicated even further. I'll show you how. This requires that you know what the diagrams in the NCRT are. The chapters for term 1, they are full of diagrams. It is my request to you. Yes, you should know what it looks like, but the only way you can really remember these diagrams is if you start drawing them. Purposely, NCRT has not gone for a lot of animations up until now. Yes, I do provide you additional study material. I provide you additional diagrammatic sketches as well, diagrammatic illustrations. Those are for your reference only. When it comes to diagram based questions, the most obvious variety should be a basic diagram based question, or if not a basic diagram based question, then at least a label based question. So I'm moving on now. This is usually what is recommended, but this is usually what is observed or predicted. This can exist as a variation of this, is the label based variety. Once again, I do not want to go into the content of the question. It is the type of question that exists in your biology sample paper that CBSE has introduced. So this in fact is additional to the diagram based, wherein the diagram, in this case it's hardly a diagram, and this is also why I recommend you stick to the NCERT diagrams, because they will be simple. I hope you know what this represents. It is DNA replication, prokaryotic DNA replication. So the same scenario that I've discussed for basic MCQs, they should follow here. The minute you look at the diagram, you should know what the topic is. Yes, of course, if the question itself is asking you what the topic is, then it becomes easy. But even if there are further series of questions to the diagram, you should first of all be aware of the topic. The minute you look at the diagram, there are quite a few in the initial few chapters. I'm talking about diagrams, not actual images. Make sure these diagrams you're aware of. This example that I'm talking about now, this goes beyond. It talks about the labels that, so instead of labels here, you have Roman numerals. But as I said, it can be labeled. So instead of this, you can be given blanks like this. What you should be aware of is the process that the diagram shows you. As long as you know the process, you can then start imagining it. This is also where drawing the diagram will help you. So you should be given a rough piece of paper. You're usually given a booklet where you can write things down. These are those questions where you may have to draw it. You may have to draw it just to recollect, because this is talking about a process. Even if this directly does not talk about a linear process, there are a lot of linear processes that you have to deal with in the initial few chapters of biology. So make sure you know again, even if you know the correct labels, by the time you start circling, by the time you start visiting your OMR sheet, once you start coloring one circle, you may have gotten confused. You know the correct labels. Let's say the A is the right answer, and you started circling C. That answer is now incorrect. You now know the fact that out of the 4 circles, once you start circling one of them, if there are 2 markings visible to the computer will ignore this question. It will, if there's no negative marking, that you won't get that mark. Simply put, this is an area of concern, and the only way to overcome this is to practice a lot. I suspect initially the school-based examinations may not introduce the OMR-based system, but because we are preparing ourselves for a board examination, which is almost only a month or 2 away, ideally, then we should start talking about this as well. Now, this is where the diagram is appropriate. What happens, remember I said that the questions become complicated. The complication could be confusion. The entire purpose of a diagram is reference. What if that reference is misleading? I'm moving on to the other type, and this is an example. Once again, this is directly from the sample paper. The idea here is to make you aware. This diagram that is shown of an embryo sac, or rather the typical embryo sac, the question asks about, the diagram does not go further deliberately. Because the one on the left is the actual NCERT diagram that this question deals with. If the diagram gives you further details, then the question has been answered automatically. That is not something that we can do. That is not something the examiner wants to do. What I'm talking about is a misleading diagram. Even if you don't want to call it misleading, it is incomplete. and it has been kept incomplete purposely. Now, although I do not go into the contents of the question, if you look at this particular question, the answer is very obvious. Why? Because uh, it's a very organized sort of distribution. Basically, it is asking about the type of cells that exist at various ends of the embryo sac, and you can see that the pattern is 3 at one corner, on both the corners, and 2 at the center. So you're already aware of the scheme. You don't even have to look at the diagram. This is also why I say it is misleading. This is also why I say, if you read the question, if you read the initial few wordings of the question, remember, continues here as well. This is part of the question. Then you know the answer automatically. Your average anatropous ovule the embryo sac in the anatropous ovule will have this pattern, 3 cells on both the ends, and centrally there are 2 polar nuclei. This refers to 7-celled 8 nucleate stage of the embryo sac. As I said, I did not want to go into the contents of the question itself. What I want you to notice is the fact that the diagram itself is either incomplete or irrelevant. The diagram is irrelevant to the question. Yes, that will happen. That has been given as a proof, and this will happen certainly. Why will it happen? It is to confuse you. There are further repercussions of this. There are further examples or type of these misleading diagrams. So once again, if you're not, even if you don't want to say misleading, you can say incomplete diagram. And it has been deliberately kept incomplete, because if the diagram gives you the details of the embryo sac, then you've got the answer. So that is why deliberately kept incomplete. You don't have to label the diagrams. The question, if you look at this question particularly, it is a very theoretical type of question, nothing to do with the diagram. You should know the answer automatically if you know the theory part of it. So this similar type of questions exist. As I said, wherever possible, I'm going to give you actual examples. A similar scenario is again given to you where the labeled diagram exists. So initially, the previous one that I showed you, I have already mentioned misleading. You can say, if you don't want to say misleading, you can say incomplete. In this type of questionnaire, the diagram is labeled, the diagram is correct, but the diagram is only for reference so that you can make out. It does not actually give you the answer, because first of all, these diagrams are, at best, these are very basic diagrams that cannot tell you a lot in any case. So this is another way of saying that if you read the question, and this question continues here, by the way. This is the major part of the question. If you read the question, here you will have to look at the options, obviously. If you look at the options, if you read what it's talking about, then you already should know. This is talking about the type of flower. Again, I don't want to go into the content here, but still, just so that you're aware, it is talking about the type of flower, the male flower, and what it should look like, the appearance of it. When it comes to the various pollination varieties, the flower shape, the flower appearance matters. I hope you know this. Even if you don't, we have had a long discussion about this. I don't want to take up these actual topics right now. We are having a very general discussion. So once again, to repeat what is basically happening here, yes, the diagram is labeled. Yes, the diagram is not misleading, but the diagram will not give you a lot of information. There are a lot of places in the NCERT where associated diagrams lack knowledge, lack information. They will be given for reference purposes only. This should be followed ideally. Now, as long as the questions are about one diagram, it's well and good. As I've said, there is actually quite a lot of variation. There's a lot of variety in the type of questions that is asked. One diagram is all right. What about if we have 2 diagrams? So whenever there are 2 diagrams, the obvious question is, a correlation, it is differentiation, so on and so forth, comparison, so on and so forth. That makes sense. When you have two diagrams, it can either be comparison or it could be a connection. So differentiate or similarities, one any of the things that could exist, but once again you should be aware. So let me give you an example. I'm moving on now. Till now we have discussed one diagram associated with the question. We are now moving on to further difficult levels where diagrams are multiple, at least two, and those diagrams are followed by multiple options. So two diagrams first of all, the diagrams are also incomplete by the way, and then they are followed by the actual question. If you look at this type of question scheme, you notice you can make out the possibility of you getting confused. There is first this Roman numeral scheming. Then you have to choose the correct options and then go for A, B, C, D as well. And before even this begins, you have seed X and seed Y. Look at the amount of bullets and numbers you have to go through. This is why I recommend we start practicing it. I have provided you some material. I will provide you more. We will continue to talk about these types of questions based on the various topics I discussed. So from now on, we shall continue the revisionary sort of classes. The schedule will stick to the same schedule. It is essential that we now discuss these type of questions, and especially based on the NCERT diagrams. Now you might ask, what is the purpose of diagrams here? If they are not labeled, they don't provide any information whatsoever. Basically, this is again, so technically this is still for reference, so that you can make out the name, the topic we are dealing with. In this case, we are dealing with the various types of seeds that angiosperms can create, based on which we have major classification of angiosperms. I don't want to go into the actual content itself, because I am aware that quite a lot of you are still to commence your preparations for these topics. It is high time we do it, by the way. If your examination is a week away, then we don't have a lot of time. Please start preparing whatever you can. Of course, I'm there for you. I will be happy to help you wherever possible. But the first opportunity is for you to study yourself. Self-study is the most important. This is a very simple case of two diagrams being compared and you being asked. So they obviously, the two diagrams being compared, the diagrams and the topic itself should have extreme scenarios. They should have extreme scenarios. One has the number should be extreme or contrastly different. The number, the shape, the color, that sort of thing. This is the usual two diagram approach that we take. Now, in this new CBSE assessment scheme, so the CBSE shared the assessment scheme before this sample paper was released, and again the document I have already discussed with you. I have already given you the fact that there will be some new patterns that will come up. They were supposed to be, this was supposed to begin even in the previous board examination, but the previous board examination has been cancelled. Therefore, you will become the first students to attempt this type of question in board examinations. What am I talking about? I am talking about what is called as case-based assessment. What does case-based assessment mean? So, theoretical type of questions is the majority, ideally, what you will deal with, especially in biology. In this case here, we have to apply the knowledge that you've learned. And that is another level that has to be mastered. The diagrams in this case are multiple. They don't have to stick to two, by the way. There can be multiple diagrams. The entire scheme of questions will be based on whether you understand what the actual topic is. If you look at both of these diagrams, yes, they are examples, but most importantly, where is the actual diagram? You are supposed to have studied an NCERT based diagram that is missing here. And this is where this type of question scheme is on another level. Case-based assessment means the answers that you're looking for, they will require that you first of all know the actual topic, and then you know the deviation that both these cases have. What is the A scheme? So if I have to go into the question itself, they represent the A and the B scheme, they represent very specific cases, they represent very basic specific hormones and their production during the ovulation or during the menstrual cycle. If you go back to the NCRT diagram, it is one complete, if you remember it, and this is something you should start doing, by the way, the minute you get to know its menstrual cycle, you should have that entire image in the back of your mind. You should have an idea of it. The fact that that entire image gives you all the information of the menstrual cycle, you should have it. To compare it, you need that basic diagram in your mind. So when you look at it, you know that there are only a few hormones and there are very specific time or phases. There are very specific phases where those hormones jump. The secretion of those hormones jump, so on and so forth. As I said, I don't want to actually take up the content of the questions. Now, case-based assessment initially that was proposed by CBSE, it does not necessarily has to be about diagrams. You could be given a proper paragraph. I think I have shared with you this type of scheme because this was what was introduced for this previous board examination, the cancelled one. So a paragraph will be given to you. It could be a long paragraph, and then the paragraph will be followed by a series of questions. To complicate it further, whether it's a paragraph or a case-based assessment, diagram-based, those series of questions could have assertion reason type. So not only are you asking case-based, you are asking assertion reason type in the case-based assessment. My apologies. That complicates matter further. That is absolutely, it is your prerogative now to make sure practice takes precedence. Of course, it requires that you have an idea of the subject itself, and that's why I say you start doing this now. It is high time that we buckle up, we start practicing, we start preparing ourselves. The subject should be prepared, and accordingly, let's start going for the practice as well. I would recommend not taking it up as an entire pile. That will make it difficult, because remember, other subjects, while I don't want to comment upon other subjects, they will have to follow a similar scheme. Please check out the other sample papers of your other subjects as well. The MCQ pattern will be followed, and a similar case-based assessment will be followed in all other subjects as well. You require a mastery of the subject. The chapters that are concerned with, they have a lot of scenarios, they have a lot of topics that can be dealt with as case-based. So even though this talks about reproduction, the most obvious I can come up, I don't want to take up actual content here, but still, just for the reference, the Mendelian genetics part of the principles of inheritance chapter, that can absolutely be case based, because there's a lot of options available. The practicality of it, the numerical basis of it allows us to ask you hypothetical questions, and that is something that was observed in the initial sample papers shared by CBSE for the subjective based examination. So there is a possibility that even genetics, Mendelian genetics, could be taken up for case-based assessment. And yes, of course, there's always molecular biology that can come up as case-based. On the top of my mind, I can think about another scenario, another topic in molecular biology, such as the Lac-Operon model. The Lac-Operon model, the experiment that was discussed. In fact, any experiment can be taken up, but since the Lac-Operon model already has 2 cases in it, remember, this would require that you recollect about Lac-Operon model. The 2 cases where usually how the bacteria grows, and then once you introduce lactose to it and force the bacteria, so you introduce lactose and make the colony devoid, you remove the glucose content, so on and so forth. This is already theoretically part of it, and that could be taken up further, so on and so forth. As I said, all experiments in molecular biology, they can be subject to case-based assessment. Let's prepare the topics accordingly. Now, this is where finally I would like to also provide to you another example. So I have kept everything according to what the sample paper has provided. That is an example on the basis of which we will come up with a lot of other question schemes. But they will be taken up as the type, these will be taken up as the type of questions that we can ask. Finally, I have another complication for you, and this can only happen. So the initial few chapters you deal with are best candidates for this type of question. What am I talking about? We are still dealing with diagrams, multiple diagrams, but only one is valid, or only one is part of the question. If you look at this diagram, you need to, or you require knowledge from both of them. You need to refer to both of them, the two diagrams. But what if, like the previous cases, the diagram is, well, let's not say misleading, but the second diagram here, and again, this is an actual example. This is one of the initial questions asked in the sample paper. The second question, the second figure, figure B, might as well ignore it. Why? Because once you read the question, basically it is talking about the journey that will be taken if the egg is fertilized or if it is not, whatever the scenario, what is the journey taken basically. If you go back to, again, I don't want to go into the content here, but if you go back to the discussion we had, I presented this arrow, if I magnify this further, while showing you the basic female reproductive system. We have discussed this scheme by presenting these arrows. The journey that an egg will take, or secondary oocyte, whatever you want to call it, will take if it's fertilized or even if it's not fertilized, because the journey is the same. The answer requires only figure A. That is the diagram which has these markings. So it is supposed to be a one diagram question. The second diagram, let me remove this. The second diagram, as you can see, is more of a hint. But the trouble with the hint is, if you start looking at it, you first of all spend some time, and then again, if you really don't remember this, this is going to complicate it for you. Basically, the hint that it gives, so I want to talk about the hint it is talking about. The answers, the XYZ scheme, are giving you terms such as morula and blastocyst. The second diagram is basically a hint to what the morula and blastocyst stage is. So even though this helps you out, ideally, this is an excellent way to help out the student to make out what figure A should be, the journey that figure A should have, and the terms associated with those entities that are formed. However, as I can see and I can make out, for students mentally or psychologically, this will become an additional issue. Why? Because if you look at the two diagrams, there is a possibility that you may bungle up the answer altogether, simply because of the fact that you are comparing two diagrams. As I said, these things you have not been prepared for ever. It is sad that we do not compare, especially in biology in lower classes. We've never done this way, and this is why it requires a lot of practice from your end. So to put it simply, there will be scenarios where multiple diagrams are given. Other diagrams, only one will be important in the sense that only one has those marking schemes which you need to answer for. The others are only for help. And I would say, although it is malicious to say it, but still they are for confusing the student. This is not the aim. Technically, it is to provide you a hint to help you out further with the diagram, but this is nothing but an actual hindrance to the actual answer. The same criteria that I have discussed with you, the same protocol that I've requested you to follow for MCQs, they continue here. By the time you're done with this much part of the question, you should have the answer. By the time you're done with this much part of the question, you don't even need to look at the second option. If you know, you know. This is a journey that we discuss extensively. Where does the secondary oocyte, if you want to call it secondary oocyte or unfertilized egg, where will it go? Even if fertilization takes place, where will it go? The journey is obvious. What is important is the name given. In embryology, every set number of cells was given a name. That name is important. That is why also the fact that I've given you a separate set of terms, a separate list of terms, it becomes important. So you can see we have a lot of homework for us. For you especially, it will now become imperative that, as I said, you should spend some time on all topics, on subjects. Maybe not take it everything up as a pile collectively. That is detrimental to the pattern. Take every subject, study some topic from it, but the way you study that topic, it should be thoroughly. It should not be the case that whatever topic you've taken up for any subject, it ends up being a formality. If you have to redirect your concentration on that subject, if you require further more time, so revision will continue. I'm not talking about revision. Other than revision, if you have to spend even more time on the topic that you spend already on, then that can become an issue. That will be a time wastage. These things have been discussed in significant, we've taken quite a lot of time in subtopics, almost months in some cases, discussing them. And that is why, if you remember, in the beginning of the academic calendar itself, I'll go back to the syllabus. In the beginning of the, let me remove all the markings. In the beginning of the academic calendar, I presented to you this syllabus. Even if it did not follow this syllabus, if you look at the total syllabus, these first few chapters, their weightage is extraordinary. Reproduction, genetics and evolution, although evolution as such as a chapter does not, the chapter itself is omitted. In any case, we have given significant time to all of these. Pick and choose. It is now up to you to look at, obviously all the classes are available to you. Make sure you check them out. But most importantly, make sure that you follow these. Whatever time you take on any topic, you make sure that it is done completely. Otherwise, it is useless. It won't be fruitful, the time you've spent on those topics. Wherever possible, wherever my help is required, I will be happy to entertain any help, but it is essential you communicate with me first of all. If you do not ask for help, I won't be able to provide that help. This was a general discussion of the new scheme that has been introduced. Once again, I do not expect your school-based examination to come up with all sorts of these scenarios, but we will still begin the practice. I have provided you enough MCQs for you to practice. Please make sure you only do them once you know the topic, because otherwise, so if you read the question and then you immediately look for the answer, the entire purpose is defeated. Try to practice it yourself, and of course, if you ask me, we can also do it ourselves. But then first of all, the opportunity lies with you. The responsibility is with you to begin this. It is my request to all of you to be aware, go through these sample papers once again. I'm talking about all subjects. Go through them, be aware of the new schemes, and then start practicing it. This is true for all subjects, by the way. The new scheme exists for all the subjects that you have. Look at the sample papers, discuss it with the relevant authorities, teachers, tutors, etc., and then start attempting the similar type of questions. Any new information that I receive from my end, I shall certainly share it with you, and I hope the same from your end as well. any new information that is received for schools, from schools, about the timetable, about the schedule, about the date sheets, it should be shared with me. Initially, we are reliant on the schools for this information. Of course, when it comes to CBSE board examination, they will share whatever information has to be shared. Once again, the practical portion, the self-assessment, it should be taken seriously. The school's responsible for it, therefore you should take them seriously. You should participate in any curricular or extracurriculum activity that your school requests you to. That may end up being more important than the theory. Of course, the theory examination is important, but looking at these scenarios, looking at the experience that your seniors had, it is essential we take the school examination seriously as well. I have given you today quite a lot of information. We will I recommend that we first look into this further before we deal with any type of any other revision. I will now make it a priority that we discuss this. So the first thing we should do is, after we've done the chapters, we should now talk about these schemes, these question schemes, and then let's start talking about individual topics and how they can be, how they can come up. The possible questions that can come up from individual topics. Of course, I would not like to take it up continuously. Let's not make it a continuous section. Let's divide it up. So we will continue the schedule based on what you have sent me, the information that you've sent me. We can continue the same schedule that exists. But for now, I will leave you to it here. Those who are visiting your schools from tomorrow, if you're visiting for the first time, please follow the precautions. Even if you're visiting not for the first time, precautions still should be followed. Precautions especially include the mask mandate. It needs to be followed, and of course most of you may now be eligible for vaccination. Those who are, go for it. Those who aren't, you should soon be the vaccinations should soon be available to you. Any diseases that you may encounter, any sickness that you feel, it should not be kept to yourselves. This is not the time for it. Let's not aggravate any situation. For now, I leave you to it. Good night. Goodbye.